Sorry, I forgot to start that.
All good. And, you know, invasives, I would say for the most part, woody invasives are a huge issue for forests here because they create a really thick layer when they become well established in the understory that blocks other plants from growing. That could be native flora and, you know, forbs, important things that make up microclimates on the forest floor. I think for foresters, a lot of times we see things in terms of trees, which is our natural tendency. And so one big problem that we have with woody invasives when they become well established in a forest is that they prevent the regeneration of new seedlings. And so when we cut trees for timber harvest, which is a healthy thing to do for normal forestry practice, if you have a lot of invasives in your woods, it prevents trees from growing back, which can be a huge problem and a really big hurdle to overcome when practicing sustainable forestry. This is a good time of year to talk about woody invasives or invasives in forests because now is a great time to identify them. They're one of the first plants in our woods that turn green, especially the bushes. So I know right now around here, especially on the side of the road, places that receive a lot of sunlight, we can see them start to leaf out or the leaves are turning green. And really that happens before most of our native species, especially species of brush. So I think the first step to, you know, understanding invasives is learning how to identify them. So I have some pictures. I'm going to switch screens really quickly and show you all some of the common invasives found in Southwest Wisconsin so that you can kind of see what they look like, at least on a computer, and maybe you can actually get outside and take a look in your own yards and woods and see what you find. All right. See if I can switch screens here. There we go. And
it's working.
How's that look, Bill? Okay. So we talked a little bit about that. So springtime is a good time to identify invasives as well as fall. So in fall, it's kind of the same thing is repeated where our native species will lose their leaves first. And a lot of the invasives, not all of them, will retain their leaves longer. So when, you know, we're getting into that second week or third week of October, a lot of times people notice the invasives even well into deer season in southern Wisconsin. If you're seeing green stuff in the woods when you're sitting in your deer stand in November, those are probably invasive brush that you're seeing and not native species. So I'd say the most common thing we have around here is honeysuckle. Honeysuckle is the first thing I see turn green in the woods, or one of the first things. It's got a really, really bright green leaf. The leaves come out of the stem opposite from each other. Can you see my mouse, Bill?
Yes.
So
yes.
You can see the leaves come out opposite from each other on the stem. That's a very important identifier. Honeysuckle has no prickly thing, no pricker, so that's a little bit different than a lot of the other invasives that have some sort of a thorn. And it has a very fragrant white or sometimes yellow flower in the springtime. And that's really the reason why we have it on our landscape, is it was planted as an ornamental in people's yards and it spread. It spreads, its seed is very hardy and birds eat it. And so the birds spread it as well. Most of the invasive brush in our woods on the landscape is going to be more predominant on the edge of a forest, side of a highway, you know, places where it receives a lot of sunlight, and then it can produce the seeds and it can keep on regenerating. But next invasive, I would say that is a really big problem. I see it a lot in Richland County, is called autumn olive or Russian olive. It has a silvery underside to its leaf. That's a very easy way to identify it. Sets it apart from a lot of other brush. It has a red berry in the fall, just similar to the honeysuckle, also has a red berry. Its leaf is a little bit waxy on the top, and it's almost like fuzzy or downy. Has small hairs on the underside of it, the silvery part. Also has a flower in the springtime, probably around, I want to say June. It flowers. It has a thorn that can be about, you know, 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches in size. They're not all over the bush, but they get you when you least expect it, which is always an unwelcome surprise. A really aggressive species has a very strong root. A lot of the other types of woody invasives or brush that I'm talking about today can be pulled easily when they're small plants. Autumn olive is difficult to pull when it's any size. It really likes to stick in the ground. Moving on, Multiflora Rose is one of our nastiest ones. And I would say that because it has a very distinctive barb. I always describe it to landowners as the one you can't push through. So if you're stuck in a clump of Multiflora Rose, you don't get very far. The barbs on it point backwards towards the stem, and they really stick to you. They rip holes in your clothes. It's a very nasty thing. It's also called the natural fence, and I believe that's one of the reasons why we have it on our landscape today. It serves well as a natural fence. It has a white flower that sets it apart from some native wild roses. And another good way to tell it apart from a blackberry or, you know, a common bramble, which it resembles in the winter, is this white oval shape that encompasses the thorn part of the plant. So blackberries or brambles don't have that white oval shape to them, and these do. So if you look close, if you can't tell, that's definitely a good identifier. Also in the fall, it gets a reddish pink rose hip is what the fruit is called. And they're larger than other berries, and they're hard. But the leaf, you know, can look similar to a common, you know, blackberry or bramble. So something to look for is that white thorn. Japanese barberry is another one. It's a little bit less common, but where we see it, a lot of times it becomes really well established in the understory of forests, even in full shade. And kind of like this picture on the left, it sprawls out. It doesn't get very tall, but it has multiple stems, and therefore is a little bit different to control than some of the other big, large bushes like honeysuckle and autumn olive, which can have really large main stems. Japanese barberry has a lot of little stems. It has these very distinctive red fruits, kind of like a rose hip, but smaller and oval in shape. Has a teardrop shaped leaf that's little, probably about the size of a fingernail. And let's see, yeah, but it's less than waist high. Yes, it also has small thorns. They are everywhere on their branches, very thin thorns. And it turns this sort of purpley orange color in the fall. And also, once again, the reason why it's on our landscape is it was an ornamental. So this one looks pretty in the fall. Easy to see when its leaves turn that purplish color. Buckthorn, you know, if you're in Southwest Wisconsin, buckthorn is one of the only problems we don't really seem to have. Locally, in small areas in Crawford County, Vernon County, I've seen patches of it, but really in Richland, I don't know that I've ever really seen buckthorn be a problem. I'm sure it's out there someplace, but you know, it's our saving grace, because where it does exist, I know in like southeastern Wisconsin, central Wisconsin, it's a huge, huge problem. So Buckthorn is a very waxy leaf. It has a dark, purple berry, similar to an elderberry. Other things that set it apart are these deep veins are very prominent in the leaves. And this picture on the left here is a little bit blurry. I apologize for that, but they're some of the largest invasives. They can be, I think, 10, 15 feet tall, really small trees at that point. And it makes this forest kind of like the picture, it looks like a mess. And that's really what buckthorn dense infestations look like. They're not pretty. Has a very distinctive bud. Here on the top right, you can see it kind of looks like a deer hoof to me. I think that's an easy thing to remember when looking for that. The tip of the branch is a good way to identify buckthorn. And it also has thorns, kind of like some of the other invasives, varying lengths and sporadic on the bush itself. And the last one I'm going to talk about now, it's the only one that's not a woody invasive, is garlic mustard. Probably most people know garlic mustard who have heard of something about invasives before. It's very well known for identification. In its first year, it has a rosette. That's the picture on the left. It's a small, compact plant that is really short. Grows close to the ground and kind of has, it's roundish and has those little, curvy edges. And when it gets bigger, it looks like the picture on the right. That's the garlic mustard when it's flowering. And its leaf becomes more triangular in shape. And if you crush it, it smells like garlic or onions. And that's very distinctive. Very easy to pull out of the ground. It's important, I think it's important to control invasives in your woods. There's so many ways to go about it. And I would say for each different kind of invasive or each, the size or the intensity of the, invasives you have on your property, there's different ways to do it. And when you're thinking about how to approach any sort of problem, or if you don't know what you have, or if it's good or if it's bad, that's always a good time to contact your local forester. It's part of our job. It's a free service we provide to people as consulting landowners, and giving them advice on how to go about fixing these problems or controlling invasives. There's a lot of help for people out there. There's cost sharing. There's different programs through the state and the federal government that will help you pay to either hire somebody or do the work yourself. And getting in touch with your local forester is a great way to find out more about those programs and about what you have and how to go about getting rid of it. But briefly, I wanted to talk about various ways of controlling invasives. A very effective way, but labor-intensive way, is a mechanical control. So digging or pulling invasives. A lot of the woody ones can be pulled when they're small. So honeysuckle, honeysuckle, Japanese barberry, the rose, garlic mustard can all be pulled very easily. And especially as small plants. And I told Bill this last week, sometimes I feel like I'm a gardener in my woods, or if I go on a walk at home in our forest, I get stuck. Like I'll walk past a little patch of like tiny multiflora rose, and I end up spending 45 minutes there because I keep on seeing another little one, and they're really easy to rip out of the ground. And I've gotten in the habit of walking around with gloves because of the rose and the Japanese barberry have so many thorns that it's definitely easier if you got a pair of gloves on to be pulling them out of the ground. Garlic mustard, really easy to pull out of the ground. It's important that you don't just leave it there. The woody ones, you can shake the dirt off the roots and leave them on the ground, or throw them. You can hang them on a different branch of a tree. But garlic mustard, can still grow if its roots remain moist. So it can keep on developing after it's pulled out of the ground, and basically make the work you're doing, you know, null and void if you don't pick up those plants and either put them in a bag, and well, you pretty much have to put them in a bag and or take them away and burn them or somehow dispose of them. But you don't want to throw them in your compost pile, and you don't want to leave them lay where you pulled them. You know, so much of the brush gets too big for us to deal with, you know, with mechanical, you know, digging and pulling. And if, you know, the bigger it is, the more likely you are to need something like a bulldozer to get it out of the ground. And I don't know about everyone at home, but I don't have a bulldozer. So it's not always the easiest option to mechanically remove plants when they're really large, and just cutting them is often extremely ineffective because they have so much energy stored in their roots that, you know, a mature autumn olive bush, you'd probably have to cut it, you know, at least 10 or 20 times in order to actually kill it. I mean, I've never killed an autumn olive just by cutting it. And so I don't tend to go that route. If I do cut it, then I combine it with some sort of a chemical application, herbicide application. I know there's a lot of people out there that are anti-herbicide. I myself am not the biggest fan, and I really don't like using it myself because I'm worried about like my health, and I don't like, it kind of grosses me out. But judicious use of herbicide and wearing proper protective clothing is a really great and effective way to kill invasives. And I also would argue that, you know, limited use of some herbicides, you know, or in a applying them well is better for the environment than letting the invasives exist like they are. You're going to be, you know, doing something good for the woods by applying the herbicide in a educated way than you are just letting the invasives be. There are different ways to apply herbicide. You know, you can spray the leaves. That's called a foliar application. You can spray, sorry, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Can you see me again, Bill?
Yes.
You can spray around the base of the stem. That's called basal bark treatment. And usually you mix the herbicide with some sort of a fuel or a bark oil. So diesel fuel or bark oil helps the herbicide penetrate the bark. You can also do cut stump, that works really well for like large plants, brush that's, you know, over 4 feet tall and has a stem that's, you know, larger than 1 inch in diameter. So you cut the tree, or you cut the brush at the stem, and then you apply herbicide just to the cut stump. So it's really a small area. Another common method that works well for larger plants is hack and squirt, where you take an axe or something like that and you hack into the tree, and then you squirt the herbicide into that opening that you made. Yeah, you're gonna say something, Bill?
Yeah, there was a question about how dangerous are herbicides. You said you should use protective clothing. How dangerous are they?
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, I think that if you're smart, and by smart, I mean, read the label, they all come with, you know, all herbicides come with a label that can be, it's worthwhile to read it. I don't think they're that dangerous if you follow the directions. So, you know, if you wear clothing that you take off and put in the washing machine and wash, and you have gloves on, mix it in a place where, you know, you're not going to be spilling it all over your lawn, or where there's something else that can be contaminated, you know, keep it out. I mean, it's like any other thing in your household that you wouldn't want your, you know, kids to get into. Keep it in a place where it's not going to be disturbed by pets or children. But I think that the way we use herbicides in a forestry setting really doesn't pose, you know, very big risk to people.
Okay.
That's my take on it. I mean, I personally like it, you know, it doesn't make me super comfortable. I have small kids at home. I don't like to, you know, go play with my son after I do it. But I wouldn't, you know, I would do it later and then I would take a shower, you know, if he's in bed or something like that, or I would hire somebody if I didn't want to do it myself. So it's not like we're broadcasting, you know, these herbicides over fields. So there's not a lot of drift. I think too, when we're talking about foliar spraying, I wouldn't recommend foliar spraying or spraying the leaves for large plants that are over your head, just so you're not, you know, you're not breathing it in. I would use that. It also makes, it's more applicable to smaller plants, stuff that's less than waist high. Yeah, any other questions?
I've got some more questions. If you, unless you have some more, you have to cover one to cover.
So I just also want to say that fire is another way that people can control herbicide or invasives. I would only recommend it in certain settings, not in every setting. Definitely sending fire through your forest is more challenging than trying to do a prescribed burn in a field. And I think it's maybe a little bit more effective for woody invasives in a field or prairie-like setting. It's a tool that's out there, and I think it has a lot of potential, but it's not something that I would recommend for every situation. But it's something I wanted to throw out there.
Okay. You ready for some questions?
Absolutely.
Okay. This is one that I've heard that many times when I've talked to people about invasives. I have too many plants to deal with quickly, like the big infestation. What should I do?
Yeah, I think that the best approach in general is to start from the outside and work your way in. So if you have areas that are less infested, not only will you make more progress, you'll be able to cover more ground more quickly, but if you're doing the work yourself, you're a lot more likely to stay motivated if you're making progress. And it can be really difficult to tackle dense infestations or places, you know, where you can't even walk through because the brush is so thick. So, you know, there's always some sort of an epicenter. And if you can get away from that and start on the outskirts and work your way towards it, you'll make the most progress and probably be the most satisfied with the work. An alternative that people have, you know, in Southwest Wisconsin, we have a lot of steep ground, so it's not always an option. But in flatter areas, a really effective way to get rid of a lot of brush really quickly is to hire somebody with a forestry mower. They're sometimes called FECON, F-E-C-O-N, and you can, you know, hire someone to come in with or brush hog, you know, and mow them all off. And a lot of those even, you know, kind of chip the plant up so that there's nothing really remaining. Everything gets cleaned up pretty quickly. The second part of that approach is that you would really need to come back and spray whatever resprouts. A lot of times the roots really aren't very disturbed, and if you wait a couple months of any growing period, the plants will resprout, and then you would want to go in and treat the resprouts, probably with herbicide. But that's a very effective way to accomplish a lot quickly and in a short period of time. It's you know, involves larger machinery and is probably a little bit more costly out, you know, from the beginning of the project, but the results are achieved pretty quickly, and there's cost sharing, you know, pretty readily available to help landowners achieve that goal too.
Yeah, that leads right into our next question. What kind of help is out there to help remove the plants? You mentioned, is there like private contractors, or is it cost sharing? All that's available to landowners?
Yeah, so there's really quite a bit of cost share programs out there. The state has a cost share program for landowners that's specific to forests. So it, you know, requires, most of the cost share programs require that you have some sort of a forestry stewardship plan in place, and you can You can hire, somebody to write you one. DNR Foresters write them to a limited extent. A lot of people already have something like that. If they're enrolled in managed forest law, you're already eligible for a lot of these programs. So the state's forestry cost share program is called the Wisconsin Forest Landowner Grant Program, WFLGP. And it's a 50% cost share program. So, you sign up for a project, you pay somebody to do the work, or you do the work yourself, and we reimburse you. The state of Wisconsin reimburses you for 50% of what you spent, or for 50% of your time, based on an hourly rate. The federal government has a couple different cost share programs. I think the one that I see is most frequently used is called EQIP, EQIP, that's Environmental Quality Incentives Program. You can get more information about those programs also from your DNR Forester, but that's a federal cost share program. So those are administered by representatives from NRCS, just part of the USDA. NRCS is Natural Resource Conservation Services. So that program works a little bit differently. I think there maybe is a little bit more paperwork involved, but it's also, not very hard to get into or to receive that funding. And the payments are done differently too. It's based on like a per acre. So it's what's the word? It's not based on how much work you do yourself or how much money you actually spend. It's a flat rate. So you sign up for X amount of acres and you get so many dollars per acre, and then that's what you get once the project is complete. So those are the two main kinds of cost sharing, I think we use for invasives. And yeah, it's a great way to get work done. It's also a good way to set up a project, and have an end goal and say, I'm gonna, work on these 5 acres this year. And then, it can make a forest with a lot of invasives and a large piece of land less overwhelming when you just bite off one piece, to chew on.
Great. Related to, you talked about mowing some of the woody invasives that you have. There's a question about mowing garlic mustard. Have you ever tried that? And is that a viable solution to controlling or eliminating garlic mustard?
I think that mowing garlic mustard is probably not the best way to control it. I don't think it's the worst way either. But the timing is really imperative, and it would be the same for pulling garlic mustard. You want to pull it or mow it before it flowers. So the picture that I showed with the little pretty white flowers, when you've gotten to that point, it's not necessarily too late, but you really want to hit those plants before then. And the problem with garlic mustard is that, even after it's mowed, if it has, it's so persistent. Even after it's mowed, if there's those flower heads on it, they can continue to develop and create seeds. And all these invasives are really so problematic because their seeds live forever. So, unlike the pepper seeds I tried to plant last week that were only a year old and did not grow, these things can live in the soil for like 7 years. They lay dormant and then they just sprout up, and they're a huge, huge problem. And garlic mustard, because of that, is an uphill battle, because you would, in theory, have to pull it every single plant for 7 years in a row in order to kill all of the seeds that are in the seed bank. I mean, it's a tough thing to get rid of. And garlic mustard really demands that someone is diligent year after year in order to sort of achieve that sort of end state of no garlic mustard, which I don't know if it's possible, but working at it is definitely worthwhile. So
yes, totally agree. And if you like a pesto, you can make garlic mustard pesto too.
Yeah. And it's in terms of like the work that you can do out there for physical labor and invasive species, it's probably really one of the easiest things to do physically. they're pretty easy to rip out of the ground. Maybe it's even satisfying. I don't know.
Yes, it is very satisfying.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's about all the time we have for the invasives discussion. I'd like to move on to our handy tip of the week, and let me share my screen. And our handy tip of the week is follow the contour, which is a fancy way of saying don't make your trails too steep on a hillside. And this is very relevant to people in the southwest part of the state where there's a lot more hills than other parts of the state. But this picture kind of demonstrates what I'm talking about. There's 2 or 3 trails pictured here. There's one that goes kind of straight up and down the hillside. And so it's a very steep trail. And there's one that kind of follows the side of the hill and slowly makes its way to the top. This one that slowly makes its way to the top is kind of following the contour of the hill. And it's important to have your trails like that so that when it rains, the water doesn't flow down the hill too quickly down your trail. And that, if it does flow down quickly, like this one that goes straight down the trail, you can get a lot more erosion taking place. It can move a lot of soil off of your trails, cause rutting, and it can be a big problem. And so if you're putting in trails, don't think like the fastest way to the top of the hill is the best. Take your time, follow the contour of the side of the hill, and your trails will last much longer than if you don't. Anything to add, Julie, to that?
Yeah, you know, roads is something we talk about a lot in Southwest Wisconsin. And, you know, luckily for us, we have a really great network. Most landowners have good roads on their property, or they have existing roads. They're not always good. And we do see tons and tons of problems with erosion. I talked to a woman today for about a half an hour on the phone about her roads, and also cost share programs that are out there and available to her, which are to a large extent the same programs that are out there for invasives. I think that there's, you know, 3 sort of rules of thumb when you're fixing or installing new roads that I always think are, if you have all 3 of these things, you're going to be a lot better off. I mean, follow the contour. So the slope is for sure important. A lot of times we have to work with what we have, and we weren't the ones that put the road in. If you can have the road be outsloped so that when you're driving on it in the winter with an ATV and it's icy, it feels like you're falling off, that's a good thing. Because if you're sliding off in the winter, that means the water is also being shed downhill, as opposed to a road that is, you know, sloped to the inside is going to create bigger and bigger ruts every year. The second thing I think would be having water bars installed, or people locally call them thank you ma'ams. And the water bars are, you know, like speed bumps that are installed perpendicular to the way that the road runs, and they are every so often, maybe every 100, 200 feet, depending on where you're at and the slope there, but they shed the water off the road. So the water, you know, runs down the road, hits the speed bump, and then gets diverted off the road. And then wherever you can, grow grass, you know, plant a pasture mix, or, you know, some sort of native grass mix that will also help further stabilize the soil on the road and keep it in place when we do get those rains. And unfortunately, you know, when we get our 100-year flood every year, there's not a lot that you can do when it rains 8 inches in a day. So, you know, that's a problem that I think we'll have to continue to deal with going forward. But people, myself included, are always devastated when we get those rains and they go out into their woods and they take a look around. But there's, you know, probably some of even the best constructed roads aren't going to hold up against that sort of precipitation in a short amount of time. So, you know, do what you can and then hope for the best. But we live in a steep area, so.
Hope for the best. I like that. All right, so we got some more questions coming in. We got off from our learnaboutyourland@gmail.com email. So this is also one that I get pretty frequently when I talk to people about their land. How much is oak selling for right now? And it's a difficult question to answer because, and a lot of times I say to people, it depends. It depends on a lot of different factors. There's what kind of trees do you have? Are they nice big trees? Are they straight trees? Are they crooked trees? Are they small trees? Do you have what kind of mills do you have in your area or nearby? Do you have sawmills, pulp mills? How far are they away? How much is diesel selling for now? There's a lot of different factors that go into what a logger will bid or pay for the trees that you have on your property. So it's often, when I work out of Rhinelander and I talk to people around the state, they ask me what's oak is selling for. I say, you need to talk to someone local who actually might have a better feel for that than I would. And I often point to people like Julie in the counties that she works in. And then I say, probably won't have a magic number to tell you, but she has a feel for what it might be selling for, what people are paying for it.
Yeah.
Is that a fair description, Julie?
Yeah, sometimes I point to yet again somebody else, but our cooperating foresters who work in the private industry, I think they sometimes might have like the best idea because they're involved in actively setting up timber sales and bidding them out for landowners. That's a service that they provide, to people. And so they see the numbers come in, and I don't always see that side of things. But yeah, you're right, Bill. There's a lot of factors. And I think we have some idea of a ballpark by talking to those cooperating foresters or private consulting foresters. And I could tell you that, oak usually, fetches you a lot more money than your aspen, or right now your ash, because ash is in, a really high supply and maybe not in high demand. But all the markets change frequently too. So it is a tough thing to say. At the end of the day, it's worth whatever somebody will pay for it. So
yes.
So really, as a forester working for the state, we always stress to landowners, if you're selling lumber, if you're selling trees, especially down here where we have pretty much a saw log only market, bid your timber out to more than one buyer. Get multiple bids, get the most value for your product. And I think that's really the only way that you can ensure that, is having multiple people give you a price for what you're trying to sell. So then you can have the fairest market value for your product.
Okay. Next question is, some of the trees I planted last year got munched by deer and other animals. What can I do to protect the rest? Well, your best bet is to try to exclude wildlife from your trees. And so some people don't like to hear this, but a fence is always the best way to protect your trees. A really good fence that's tall enough that deer can't jump over and that small animals can't get through. Now, if you're not willing to invest in a fence, there are repellents that people use that work pretty good. Some of them wash off when it rains or it snows, and so you have to reapply them. And there's things you can do around the trees to keep the wildlife from eating them, like mowing around your trees so that the small mammals don't have places to hide and predators can find them. But it's tough. And if you're not willing to put up a fence, you have to be willing to take some damage from wildlife. What's been your experience, Julie, with protecting?
I would agree. Yeah, I agree 100%. It's getting harder and harder to keep deer from browsing our planted trees and young seedlings. Fencing is your best route. Really fencing off large areas with tall fence is pretty, I think it can be overwhelmingly expensive for landowners. Once again, there's cost sharing available for fencing, but on a smaller scale, a lot of people are talking about like the 10 apple trees they planted, and if I had 10 apple trees, then I would put, 3 stakes in the ground, like steel fence posts, and I would put them a good 3 feet away from the tree. And I would put some at least 4 or 5 foot tall, like steel welded wire around the trees. And that's time consuming and relatively expensive, but if you only planted 10 trees and maybe you paid $40 a piece for them, I'd say it's well worth your investment.
Oh yeah.
If you planted 100, let's say 100 pine trees or 50 pine trees, kind of another smaller quantity for forestry purposes. Another thing you can do is, put bud caps on them. So a bud cap is something that protects the tip or the tallest tip of the tallest branch. So we call it a terminal bud, but really it's the, you know, it's the tallest part of the tree. And if you buy something like screen or mesh, you know, like the same that you would use for to screen off a screen door, you can cut it up into little squares, fold it in half and staple it over the bud. But once again, you have to do it in the fall and take it off in the spring so that the tree can grow again. A little time consuming, but hey, if you only had 50 trees, it's better than having no trees in year 2. So I would do it for a small number, you know. And a lot of times in forestry, you know, I think we go the route of overwhelming the deer with high numbers of seedlings. So I think we're getting to the point in Southwest Wisconsin, let's say for oak, where if you were going to do a normal oak plantation of planting 700 seedlings an acre, I don't think that's enough to overwhelm the deer. I think you're going to have really high mortality rates there. And I almost think that we're looking at doing what we call high density tree plantings, which is really just jam packing the seedlings in the ground, you know, more like 2,000 seedlings an acre, and then having overwhelming amount of seedlings there so that the competition that you have from the deer isn't quite as devastating to your final, you know, the what lives and what dies in your plantation. So, you know, it's definitely, I would say it's a fight, and fencing is a great option. If you can swing it, it's probably, you know, the I don't know, it's the easiest. It's getting harder and harder, but there are options out there. There's a couple different routes you can go. Seedlings are cheap, so we tend to put a lot of them in the ground if we can. Foresters.
So along the lines of how much does it cost for oak, I get another question of how much. I tell people, work with a forester. It's always your best bet. You'll get more money in the long run if you're doing a timber sale. And they ask me, well, how much does it cost to hire a forester? And I say, well, it depends.
Yeah.
And it depends on how they want to get paid more often than not. Some like to get paid by the hour. Some like to get paid by the job, how big the job is. Some like to get paid by the acre. And so you have to ask a forester before they do start doing any work, how do they want to get paid? And if you can, develop a contract and sign a contract with them for any work that you would do.
Absolutely.
Anything to add to?
I would only add that, you know, your DNR Forester is, you know, we provide free services, and those services are, you know, we really provide landowners with mostly a lot of information, and then we connect you to programs that either we administer or that other, you know, agencies, other governmental agencies administer. You know, private foresters, you know, for hire are mainly hired for writing managed forest law plans, creating those plans, and then also to set up timber sales, you know, at least down here. That's what I think that people are mainly hiring foresters for. But your DNR forester can provide you with a list of the people who work locally. I think probably every DNR forester has a list of all of the foresters that they're aware of that service landowners in their county. We don't get recommendations. We don't give recommendations. Yeah. I always get asked to recommend people, but we're the state and we don't like to get in the middle of things. All of the private foresters are our partners, so we can give you a list, and then I always tell people to call around. And when it comes down to it, I mean, price is a huge factor, but also communication. So if you call somebody up and it's a weird conversation, you know, if they're going to be hard to talk to, I would say hire that person like you'd hire anybody else. You know, can they understand what you want? Are they listening to your needs? You know, and go with that sort of gut feeling too.
Yeah, that's exactly what I tell people. If the first question out of the forester's mouth is, what does you want to get from your forest? That's a good sign. It might be a good person to work with. If the first thing they say is, here's what I think you should do, without finding out what your goals are, that's probably not a good person to work with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so we've been hearing a lot about pruning trees for oak wilt. Now this is time to stop pruning. And I got a question in about walnut. Is it too late to prune walnut trees? Does it follow the same kind of thinking about oak in that
Yeah,
regard?
somebody asked me that just the other day. And, I'm not 100% sure what the exact cutoff date for walnut is, but like everything else, it wants to be pruned in the dormant season. And so, really exactly where you are, if you're in southern Grant County or northern Vernon County, it's going to be a different date when those trees start leafing out. But walnut is one of the latest trees to get leaves. And so it comes out of its dormancy the latest in the springtime. And so you probably do have a longer window than oak. But if it were me, I feel like we're getting close to the time where trees are really coming out of their dormancy and those buds are getting thicker, they're beginning to swell. I would probably say, if it doesn't have to be, which pruning trees, probably can usually wait a year, I would wait till this winter. You don't have as big of risks, like with oak wilt, with walnut, but I would, I say, why push it now if you can just wait till next year?
Yes, I think that's the safest bet. It's the a few more months of growth aren't going to hurt, aren't going to make that big a difference.
Yeah.
All right, let's finish up our discussion with our tree of the week. And this week it's the yellow birch, or the Betula allegheniensis. I like this tree a lot. It has a very character-driven tree. The leaves have similar characteristics as to last week's tree, which was the red maple, in that there's double teeth around the outside of the margin of the leaf. In this case, the leaf is very simple. It's kind of an oval shape. And the arrangement is the leaves come out alternating along the branch. The bark is very characteristic. It's hard to miss. It's kind of thin and peels off in vertical strips or horizontal strips like you see in this picture here. It's kind of got a gold or copper color, depending on how colorblind you are like me. and the flowers are on the right, picture on the right. If you have a birch tree, you can get inundated with these flowers when the season is right, and can cause a lot of allergy problems. Some facts about the yellow birch is that right now, and Julie kind of mentioned this, what goes out of fashion, what goes out of style for wood, the light colored woods are very fashionable right now and popular. Sugar maple, yellow birch, very popular woods right now. And so the bigger high value trees can get a lot of more, are very valuable and can get a lot more money for those. The new stems, the new twigs on the yellow birch, if you crush it, it has a wintergreen scent to it. And some people even make a wintergreen tea out of the twigs. And finally, the bark has a reflective quality to it. So if you go out at night with your flashlight and shine it on the yellow birch, it'll reflect really well, or even off of moonlight, you'll see some reflection off.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Cool.
You a fan of the yellow birch there, Julie?
I love yellow birch. In Richland County, we don't have a ton of it. We see it, it's not as predominant in our northern hardwood forests. So northern hardwoods are made up of sugar maple, which we have a ton of here, and ash and basswood, and yellow birch is also a component of that forest type. It's really very, I would say, limited, but they're very special trees in very special areas, like on the sandy bluffs of some of our smaller rivers. You see them on the northern slopes and the shady areas. So here, that's along Willow Creek, Pine River. But yeah, it's a special tree. It's really beautiful. And I don't see a lot of it that gets to a commercial size. They're usually, it's a small component here, but I think up by you guys in the northern forest, don't you have a lot more of it?
It's more, but it's still a small component, or a lesser component in the forest. It's really neat to see them because they're not as common as the maples or the basswoods of the world.
Yeah, I also really enjoy it when I stumble upon them.
All right, that's what we have for today. Next Tuesday at 4:30, we'll be talking about the 8 documents every woodland owner needs. So thanks, Julie, and thanks for everybody for attending, and we'll see you next week.
No problem. Thank you.